if like people are coming to let them trickle in. Okay, we are live.
Cool.
Yay.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
This is gonna be the
that
most
Marie
energetic
Kondo
live show since like Save Me the Waltz, I dare say.
that Marie Kondo like meme that's like, I love the mess. I mean, like, not that this is enjoyable mess. Our live show is gonna be top tier.
Starting off 2024 with a bang, guys. Actually, too much of a bang.
Take the bang down a notch, please.
Yeah. Oh boy.
We went from the Blue Castle to this, and I'm like,
Polar opposites.
Yeah. We might as well get started because I feel like we're shaking. So hi everyone. Welcome to our Facet Classics live show. Today we are going to be discussing I keep wanting to say 100,000 years of solitude, and I'm so happy it's not 100,000 because I can barely handle 15 years.
Way too many years of solitude.
Yeah, technically I only made it through 50 years of the solitude.
I'm so excited to get to that. But by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Oh, and Bento's here to provide emotional support.
Hello, baby. Thank you for helping us through this.
I'm happy he finished eating. He was making the most disgusting noises.
After reading this book, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
So before we sort of dive into the book, why don't you guys thank you. There will be plenty.
Yes, I like messaged Kier right before we went live, and I was like, hey, like we had like possible scheduling issues, so we had to like do it even more last minute than usual because I lost power. So we just confirmed that we were doing it, and I knew that Kier had read it and also really didn't like it, so I cannot wait.
Yes, Kier, yeah. I liked your review earlier today. In fact, on Goodreads, I was like,
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yep.
So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself, introduce your history with Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Have you read this book before or anything by him? And should we do overall ratings just right away?
Probably, yeah.
We're looking at overall ratings.
Put it all out there.
Who would like to go first?
I can go, or Julia.
I'll go. I'll get it out of the way.
Yeah.
So I have not before now read any Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Ironically, I do have another book of his on my February TBR, so that'll be fun. Really looking forward to that now. It's very short. It's Chronicle of a Death Foretold.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard of that one.
It's short.
So
God. Better already. This was not it for me. Wait, what else am I supposed to say? My channel is Shakespeare and such.
I'm ready to complain.
Yeah. So it's a Past It Classics first. With my co-host's blessings, I DNF'd this book for my own mental health. I was in tears reading the SparkNotes synopsis of the second half of the book. Like, I thought I was going to lose it. So imagining sorry, that's harsh, but wasting my entire Sunday reading this book. Yeah, I was fair. Like, I'm going to lose my mind because outside of everything else, there's new work stress, and I started rehearsals last week. So I'm like, I don't have time to be reading this.
Also, life is too short.
Life is too short. So I did make it exactly 222 pages in, but actually, I should mention, ironically, this is my second time trying to read this book. I once picked it up as an audiobook. I don't want to like get too into things yet, but I DNF'd at what is basically the equivalent of page 20. So immediately I was like, I don't think this is right. But I was like, maybe this needs to be a physical read. Did not prove to be any better for me as a physical read. I don't rate my DNFs, but I did try to like apply my scale Just so
what does your heart tell you, Julia?
And my rating would be a 1.4 because I will give him some writing credit. There were a few beautiful turns of phrase in between all the gross ones. But 1 for characters, 1 for pacing, 1 for plot, 1 for enjoyment, 3 stars for writing.
Amazing.
That's where I'm at.
Cara?
So, I did finish the book. Was that a good choice? I don't know. I also ended up doing, I read the first 100 pages physically, and I can't. So thankfully the audio helped, and I ended up actually doing a blended read for part of it, where I was I turned up the speed, and I'm I'm gonna force myself to finish this. Anyway, I also forgot to introduce my channel because I'm so mad about this book already. Hi, I'm Cara. My channel's Wild Book Garden. Obviously I did not have a good time with this book. I had not read anything by this author before, and it's kind of funny because when I first was looking at my copy and I was starting to read it, I was I had this memory of talking to one of my other friends who we were talking about magical realism and how both of us had sort of negative first experiences with the genre, which now of course Anna Marie McLemore is one of my all-time favorite authors. I will recommend them every single chance I get. But we both had kind of negative first experiences, and I remember this friend telling me about how she read this this great classic of magical realism, and how disgusting and disturbing it was. And I remember her telling me some of the stuff that happens in it, and she's it was awful, and I turned me off the genre for years. And as I was starting this book, I was it might have been this author. It seems I might remember that. And by the time I was 2/3, I was I think it was this book specifically. Yeah. So, I mean, I went in fresh, not having that information. So all of this is a genuine reaction. I gave it 2 stars originally, but even before we started talking, I'm this does not feel like a 2-star. Because I was also thinking of the quality of the writing is very good. And I do think there are occasionally interesting things he says about war and violence. But I'm I just looking at a 2-star rating for this book, it makes me mad. So I'm I don't know. I have Goodreads open right now. I'm this might be a 1.5 that I adjust. Yeah, so I had a terrible time. 100 years of suffering.
Sorry for the loud noises. My cat has decided to just go up on my dresser and knock things down.
I can see him. He's hey.
There he is. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
He says, what? I'm not a model.
If he starts eating plastic, I may have to get up and grab him. So I'm Taylor. You're on my channel page, Screen Taylor. If I were to post, I would post about, I read mostly romance, classics, women's lit, fantasy, sci-fi. So across the board, but mostly romance, I think, at this point in my life, and classics. I had not read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I was really looking forward to getting some more Latin American literature on our book club.
R.I.P. to our dreams.
Because I really liked Water for Chocolate. And I think I tend to struggle with magical realism, and I think the big thing is I struggle with magical realism written by men. I'd also read Bless Me Ultima, and I didn't particularly like it. So I had never read anything by him before. I was really looking forward to it. I got this really pretty copy of the book. I think it's beautiful.
I'm obsessed with mine. I wish I could be obsessed with the inside.
Yeah, I was telling Cara before we went live, I'm going to have to get rid of this book because I don't want it in my house.
Get it away. Get it away.
Negative energy.
Yeah.
I think I'm also going to give it about a 1.5 star because I was leaning towards 2 originally because I do think he is a very talented writer, and like his description and sometimes like even the inclusion of magical realism like in a lot of ways are like it's effective. And I did like the theme of like time being this sort of like circular flat circle thing that's just going to keep repeating itself. The description of this video is time is a flat circle and so is his family.
Yeah.
And so it gets 1.5 stars for me for the writing, and I did like the one character kind of, and that was Ursula.
Yeah, Ursula. Also, hashtag justice for Pietro. What did he ever do?
And also, let's just throw in the first Remedios in there.
I can't even like. Yeah, I can't even articulate.
Let's hop into trigger warnings and. Thank you, Kier. Ursula was like the
MVP of this book.
Literally,
like thank God.
The first tab color I added was for Ursula. I was like, I got good vibes. And then the second tab was, as you two know, thanks, I hate it.
Yeah, like I thank God that Ursula didn't die in like the first 40 pages because I could not have made it through this book without her.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we all like Ursula because she's the only character who hates her family as much as we all hate her family. So
I know it's like by comparison, I love her, even though like it's like if this book were more good and had more characters that I didn't want to like push in front of a vehicle, like I probably would be like, oh yeah, Ursula, like she's fine, you know, she was fine or cool or whatever. But I'm like, you can pry Ursula out of my cold dead hands because she was carrying this family on her back.
True.
Yeah, literally once she died, I was like, what's even the point? I have to admit, I like blanked out for a good part of it. Like I like disassociated. I was not So I wanted to add some trigger warnings, and by some I mean many. So we've got incest, rape, pedophilia, suicide, child marriage, child rape, child sexual abuse, grief, vomiting, disease, period racist language, war, violence, murder, executions, and a depiction of Pika. And that's what we could remember. Thank you so much, Cara, for providing this.
Yeah.
And I did actually want to include some facts because as a Latina, I appreciate what he's done for Latin American literature, but also as a Latina, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my YouTube apology.
The fact that this book won a Nobel Prize, I was voice messaging Sarah. I was like, I'm sorry, but rescind the prize. Take it back. I'm like, I don't know who else was up for nomination.
But I can guarantee it was something better. I was like livid monologuing to my mom about the whole Remedios situation. And like I'm never gonna be not angry that this book has won all the prizes it did.
Okay. Before we like fully dive into this story, can I just ask, and this should be technically like an after the show conversation, have either of you read The House of the Spirits?
No, I was thinking about that from you talking about,
because I have read that book and I obviously liked it way more than this one, but also enjoyed it more than like Water for Chocolate. So at this point, I will be forcing us to read it at one point because I would like a reread. And I think it does so much of what is in this book in a way that has purpose or has a message or like is super disturbing. Like there are parts of that book where I was like, I'm going to dry heave. That is so gross. Like it was nasty, but I got the point.
I can't wait.
Narratively. And there's like one character who I loathe with like the passion of a million suns, but then so many other really interesting, cool, nuanced characters. So I'm just
I was also thinking while I was reading this one of Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno
That's
Garcia,
a really good one.
because that one also I think has quite similar content and like disturbing elements, but it's handled, like you were saying, Julia, with purpose and with intention and with care. So I think if you are intrigued by like some of the ideas in this book, but you're like, I don't know about the execution, I feel like Mexican Gothic would be a really good place to go next. I mean, it is Gothic horror as opposed to magical realism, but honestly, I feel like it has a lot of the same horrifying parts that this book does.
Yeah.
But again, it's like commentary on like colonization and eugenics and sexual abuse. Like it actually, Silvia Moreno Garcia actually like says something. Not to mention like all the character work and setting and all of that is like, I think, much better done. So even aside from content, I think that it's just an excellent book. So that's my book.
Also like weaves in the magical realism with the Gothic literature like theme very well. Which like also fits with the theme of like European culture melding with this like indigenous or traditional Mexican culture. Yeah, Mexican Gothic is really good. I haven't read House of Spirits yet, but I've read Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende, which is really good.
Which I think is technically a prequel or a sequel to it. It's related somehow.
Oh, I didn't even know.
Yeah, I haven't read it.
It has a mom in it, Julia. I know from Taylor recommending it.
So I guess what we're getting at is magical realism written by Latina women is where to go. Because I feel like at this point I'm like, oh, a man wrote this.
It's a bit of a red flag.
Out of respect to, after a while, I just called him GGM. GGM. I was like, I can't even look at his name right now. I'm so So this book was originally published in Spanish in 1967. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is Colombian, and a lot of the elements from Colombian history and revolutions, wars, like workers' strikes and revolutions are taken directly from Colombian history. As we said earlier, it's a magical realism book, and it's considered a seminal work of the Latin American boom of the 1960s and 70s. And it's considered his magnum opus. So, woo!
Another Past Classics book that I was thinking about while reading this one, and I don't want to get into too many comparisons between like this book by an author of color and a book by a white author, but like East of Eden by John Steinbeck.
I thought of that too.
Again, weird incest like relationships, tragedy porn that is not always handled well, like a lot of the same issues, but compared to this book, I feel like East of Eden, like I did care. Like some of the characters and the relationships were like so beautiful. There are lines in that book that are going to live in my head forever. And so I feel like, again, even though I'm not like the biggest John Steinbeck fan, and I think there are a lot of things that he could have done better, I like think about a book like that and I'm like, okay, so there are ways to like write a book that has these things and the other elements somewhat balance out how unpleasant the reading experience is. Which obviously they're very different like projects, like the intentions of the books are different, but again, like the content and the very conflicted feelings about some things I think are similar for me.
Also both quite biblical in terms of like allegory.
Yes.
Which I didn't pick up on with this one until I was on Spark Notes, but go off, I guess.
I didn't pick up on at all, so I'm excited to hear your explanation because I was like, God is not in these pages.
Oh yeah, God is absent here.
You all need What Remedios the Beauty just like ascends to heaven, and I'm like, oh, I guess it's like symbolism.
It's supposed to be the town's loss of innocence is like
it also is very the way they talk about it. I don't know, Taylor, if you felt like this. It felt very much like the Ascension of Mary, like the language and the fact that like it wasn't like she died. It was like she was alive and then she just like levitates up to heaven. So very similar to, I feel like, the Ascension of the Virgin Mary.
That's a really good point. I was my brain was, you know what, girl, good for you. Get out of this family.
Godspeed, hun. Like,
Fly, girl, fly.
It reminds me kind of and no spoilers yet, but how this whole book, I was like, God, I just can't wait for this family to be gone and over with. And then when I read how the family ends, I was like, but not like that.
There's gonna be just a lot of like distressed, like grossed out noises, I think. And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy we have a hard stop because I think I could talk about how much I dislike this book forever. But so my first discussion question here is like, let's talk about this family tree. Like, obviously the incest is a big part of it, and you can take that out of context all you want, but that's a big part. But like, why does the family keep intermarrying, and why do we think that they just keep giving each other the same names repeatedly throughout the family tree? Other than like, technically, not the incest, the naming conventions is part of like Latin American tradition, but
Right.
it's very intentional in this book.
Yeah. I mentioned in our group chat that it's like I compared it to Wuthering Heights, which also has that whole naming thing. But I think like one of the reasons behind it in this book is that the book is about how like cyclical things are. Like people, again, kind of like East of Eden, making the same mistakes over and over and being trapped by that. So I think by having the characters named the same thing, and also having like we're told a lot about how like they have personality traits of their namesake. But that being said, like even my copy had a family tree that I looked at multiple times, and there were so many parts where I'm like, I don't remember which one you are. Like they're talking about like what the colonel's doing, and I was like, I thought the colonel was already dead, and then they're talking about like a different colonel. I get some of the intention behind it, but I don't feel like it was very effective. And also like, so we have all of those, like one of those guys, like 17 children who all have like the same
17
Aurelianos. Yeah. And I don't know if we're in like spoilers yet, but essentially that whole
we don't need
they all get they all get like picked off like it's open season. And so I'm like, what was the point of that whole plot line? Like literally why? Like that's one of the things that frustrates me about this book is it's like I can imagine a reason for you writing it this way, but then you didn't do anything with it. So why? I think I got off topic a little there.
No. That's like a really good point, because a lot of it does feel very intentional, and you know, maybe we just didn't pick up on like the symbolism of having 17 Aurelianos and them just dying, but I also didn't figure out like why we had these 17 and why they died.
I was like, oh cool, so this was a waste of time. Like literally everything involving these 17 guys doesn't matter.
Yeah. Another one. Okay, I'm going to complain about the names, and then I'm going to answer the question about the names. Just for clarification. Another one of my voice notes to Sarah ranting about this book was that, okay, this is partially about the names, but kind of the way you are describing about the 17 Aurelianos is that every single chapter of this book is like the first page, like the first big paragraph tells us something like, before his death, he thought about this and and then the rest of the chapter is 28 pages saying that same thing longer. I'm like, you could have said that one paragraph instead of doing a weird time jump, because you already told me like on his deathbed, and he had his portrait of his mistress, and Fernanda left, and then you tell me again. I know, you told me that. I'm so mad.
We could have just read the first sentence of every chapter and been done with it.
The only way to read this book and have like a marginally good time.
But so yeah, my family tree, is, I don't know, like compared to your guys, I just felt like mine needed more.
Yeah.
Because like we
It
have
didn't help.
Rebecca included in there by marriage, and I'm like, but she's your adopted daughter. Like, put her in the sibling lineup because you raised her. Like, there's
Yeah.
things like that where I'm like, I know it's hard to show, but include it because it's true.
There'd be like so many crossing lines.
Oh,
Like,
That's when you add like a dotted line and a dashed line. It's
yes.
like, you gotta.
There's one part, like I went back and checked like multiple times, like because I was listening to the audio at this point. So I was like, I gotta find my copy and check this. And I looked and I could not find definitive information. And I'm like, I think that this book is telling me that this man just went to his mom, who is a prostitute, and had sex with her. Right? Like I think that happened. And like that information, like you said, Julia, not in the family tree. It's like I don't feel like the lineup of like exactly which Aureliano is which is nearly as important of like, okay, so are you sleeping with your aunt or your mom or your half sister, like,
or your adopted sister,
your adopted sister who like you continuously are calling each other siblings. Like I can't.
Sorry, we're getting so off topic.
No, I was trying to say, you know, it's bad when I was like, well, at least the bloodline's getting some new DNA. When Jose Arcadio married his adopted sister, I was like,
at least you're not related by blood. Like we get to the end.
Cool.
Yeah. Like the end. You know, you also know it's bad because like I was like complaining about this book as well to other people. And like, you know, it's bad when I'm like in the middle of it and I'm like, oh, I have to differentiate. It was this incest pair of an aunt and a nephew, not this other one. So like the one at the end, like at one point when they're like, oh no, are we maybe siblings? And I knew that we were told about the guy's parentage and I just couldn't remember it. And I was like, I don't think it was siblings, but honestly, I'm not sure anymore. And you know it's bad when you get to the end and they find out and I'm like, oh, it's just his aunt.
Yeah. That's cute. Like that's where they're okay to draw the line.
I was like, this is still unacceptable. Oh my god.
Kier. Let me put that up again because yes.
Yeah,
it's
like,
so true.
I don't want like of two evils. An aunt and a nephew getting married or a man marrying a child. Like, I don't think either is a good option. Okay.
Yeah, above, please. Yeah. I also like I'm getting so upset I'm losing my train of thought. So you guys jump in.
I do have something to say about the naming conventions after you finish what you say, Cara. I've saved a page though, so I won't forget.
I was just going to say that I told you two earlier that this is like the laziest family I've ever read about because they won't even go outside their own home to date.
They don't leave the house. Like at least with Wuthering Heights, it was like the next door.
He had to get up and walk somewhere.
Yeah. Oh boy.
And the rest of the condo is like watching this home going like, these people are like freaks.
I know. It's like so they're like 2 generations away from like inbreeding death, right? Like oh my god, yeah. And the other thing, so like with the adopted sibling thing in particular, it's like I have read stories where it's like, okay, if 2 characters are just related by marriage when they are adults and they did not know each other, did not grow up, like that is something that I can understand. Like I don't mind that. It doesn't gross me out because they're not related by blood and they don't think of each other as siblings. It's basically like 2 people in the same age who would have liked each other are like thrown together. And it's like, yeah, you might get some like romantic feelings. So that could have been an option instead of like these 2 people who very obviously continuously think of each other as siblings. And when he's like, oh, you turned into a woman, sister. Yeah. And I'm like,
little sister, you've grown up.
And she ditched a perfectly nice Italian man to go live with her brother and his hammock.
I know. I am like upset out of all proportion about what happened to Pietro. Like, yeah. It's so messed up, and he was so nice. And, like, everybody's like, oh, he's too charming and pretty, and I'm like, yeah, I guess when he's not your brother. Like,
oh yeah, and the dad's like, oh, don't worry about it, he's a fairy, and I'm like, what? Like, come on now.
Because he takes care of himself.
Yeah, I got problems. Anyways, now I have another thing. Okay, because this is the thing, I alluded to this in our group chat where, like, we need to really put this in context here. I had a flowers in the attic phase. One of my favorite TV shows is The Borgias, okay? It takes a lot to cross the incest line for me and be like, I really am uncomfortable here. And this book was way too much. Way too much. Like, not only in like amount, but also it was like not only like a nephew and an aunt, but like an aunt who like raised him, where he was like her son.
Here just meant this part I've been thinking about, and the bath scene, how she would like bathe him and like touch him, and I'm like, so grooming. Like, and I believe this was a separate incestuous pair of an aunt and a nephew, that was like, he would climb into her bed.
I think it was the
at
same
night, or was it the same one? Okay, because I think there were two separate instances of like an aunt that was really involved in like raising the kid. But I could be wrong.
Both of those scenes, so I don't know if it's the same one, but they were close enough that I.
Okay, I mean, either way, even if it is the same person, still both awful. Yeah, I hate it here. Like,
I was uncomfy even, and Ursula, she didn't even do anything. She's just a mom. But when she saw her teenage son undress and go, wow, he's got quite a lot down there. I'm like, don't notice that. Just don't comment on it, please.
Yeah,
no,
it sucks when like our favorite character is also a huge creep.
Yeah, and also like, so there's all of the really big like ethical sexual grossness, like literal, like illegal and statutory rape and all the horrible things, but also like even separate from that, just like the language around the sexual elements is so bizarre to me. Like, okay, Julia, I think this was at the very end of the book, so like I bet, I'm sure you read the summary part, but you didn't maybe see the like quoted line. But in the final incestuous pair, he's like, and everyone loved him because his junk was so big. So the like aunt nephew pair that like ends the book, we are told way too much about the noises that she makes during sex, but also like, okay, like a howling cat. Yeah. And I'm like, that's an image. But the one that like really creeped me out is that multiple times we are told by the narrator, and like the narrator through the main character or the guy, that like her sexuality is like a weasel. Like, he is like so turned on because she's like writhing around under him because he like assaults her. But it's okay because she also likes him, so I guess we're not supposed to mind. And he like holds her down and she's like squirming around like a weasel, we are told, and that like really gets him going.
Ew.
I'm like, what have you done to weasels? Like,
leave weasels alone.
Leave them out of this. Like, and it was multiple times. Like, it was at least twice, I think, that like her sexuality was like, you know, like a weasel you want to fuck. And I'm like, I don't think this is as universal as you think.
It's not a relatable thing.
No.
Okay, I will say that version of, I think that's Amaranta, I did like it first because she came in leading her husband on a leash.
By a leash? I know. I was like, you're kind of iconic. Like,
I initially liked the first Amaranta because she was like, I will literally murder you before you marry him. I was like, oh my God, wait a second. This is wild. Like, I was living for the drama until the incest came into play. Okay.
That's the tagline of so much of this book. Yeah.
The only allowed sex scene. Love that.
Now I'm imagining a film adaptation, but that Amaranta is played by Hugh Jackman.
It's a choice. Taylor, I'm going to answer your question right now, by the way. So
I forgot I even asked one.
Yeah, no, you did. So I think it all comes back to this line from our queen, Ursula, when she said, "Children inherit their parents' madness." A great quote. And
especially when the parents are sick.
So we see that cyclical, again, nature of like, okay, he's in, what's his face? He's in Aureliano. He's going to be a very like introverted, introspective kind of guy. Or, you know, he's a Jose Arcadio. He's going to be rough and tumble and blah, blah, blah. Until like the twins kind of break the cycle, which I think is interesting that they were like so mixed up that even on their funeral, they put the coffins in the wrong. Like, I don't know if that was supposed to be funny, but I genuinely
think it was. Yeah. Yeah. I found the weasel part. Julia, you have to experience this. If I had to read this, you have to read this.
No, my DNF.
Amaranta. So this is when the nephew is like sneaking into her room and forcing himself on her, but like in a hot way. Amaranta Ursula defended herself sincerely with the astuteness of a wise woman, weaseling her slippery, flexible, and fragrant weasel's body as she tried to knee him in the kidneys and scorpion his face with her nails. And then blah, blah, blah. It goes on. More like weird language. Then she began to laugh with her lips tight together, without giving up the fight, but defending herself with false bites and de-weaseling her body little by little. There's 3 weasels! Like, I don't...
And that's all one scene. It's not like another scene.
It's one morphing into a weasel and then morphing out of a weasel.
Weasel up, weasel down. Like, it's... and also like the slippery, fragrant weasel.
The fragrant really got me. Oh no. Why? I didn't want dubcon content in my magical realism. That's not what I'm here for.
I'm picturing like the translator just like, you know, doing his job, like reading, and then he's just like,
fragrant
weasel.
He just keeps checking. He's like, surely this is a mistranslation.
Yeah. I misread that, right?
No, that was literally me when the book was like, oh, and then he went and slept with her, and he remembered seeing his mother, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, sorry?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Going back to the question I asked.
Sorry, Taylor.
No, it's fine. And the
names.
Julia, it is like really nice to read. Not nice to read this, but you know, a good way to look at it is also like intergenerational trauma and how this trauma keeps getting passed down through them. So much so that they keep marrying into each other and continuing the trauma down. That's all I gotta say.
Spark Notes also, I'll include my Spark Notes knowledge since I read all of that. They also had a lot to say about how like the incest has a lot to do with like the isolation of the family and how they're very like closed off from the rest of the world, which I'm like, yeah, okay.
Symbolic, but also like there was a lot.
There are other people in Macondo and a group of traveling Roma people that like come through. Marry them.
Please. Like, and what about, okay, at one point, Ursula comes back, which I love that she's like, I'm going to go find my son. She comes back. She's like, oops, I succeeded where my husband failed. And I'm like, an icon. I love you. Whoops. So like she discovers all these other communities. I'm like, you guys have options. Like, don't lie to me. Like,
they're not good enough there.
So just going back to like facts about this book that I read. So I thought the inclusion of the Roma people was just a sort of element there, or they were using it in general as like, oh, these travelers are coming through. But actually there was, at the time of writing this, it was estimated that there were about 8,000 Roma people living in Colombia.
Oh.
Interesting.
Did not know.
And, you know, I'm going from the Wikipedia here. So 100 Years of Solitude is one of the only books that sort of written at its time that includes the Roma population throughout the story.
Positively, in fact.
Right. It's like there is definitely a lot of like othering and like complimentary, but like in a weird way.
Yeah.
But like the actual portrayal of the characters is very positive. Like especially like Mezquiades.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Also like it's interesting to note that the Romani people, like none of them get up to the nasty shit that the family do. Like they're minding their business, they're marrying out of their family, like
They come
living
by
the
and they're like,
dream.
ooh. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting, and you know, they weren't negatively portrayed, and they are sort of portrayed as outsiders, but I also feel like most people are portrayed as outsiders, even people that try to marry outside of the family, like Pietro and Gaston.
Yeah, which is so funny that there was a character named Gaston, because when Jose Arcadio came back from the first time all tattooed and like eating eggs and a test.
Sorry.
An emergency?
Yeah, flash flood warning.
Oh.
Do not attempt to travel unless you are fleeing an area subject to flooding or under an evacuation order.
Oh.
We love to hear, do not leave unless you are fleeing.
Yeah.
Right? It's like stay there unless you are in imminent danger. Yeah. Anyway,
but I wrote in the margin, I was like, wow, big Gaston energy here, because he was like sleeping with all the women, eating eggs, being all muscly, and then I was like, oh, and now there's a real Gaston. Amazing. They knew.
You manifested him.
I didn't actually get that far. I didn't meet the character Gaston, but I know he was there.
I think he wasn't like that bad. He let his wife lead him around on a leash, and then I think eventually got tired of like the freak Buendias or something.
Yeah.
He wanted to leave. And he did, and Amaranta wrote to him and was like, hey, I'm in love with this guy, who's my nephew. I don't think she knew that at the time, but yeah, I'm adding that. And he's like, okay, can you just send me my bike?
Yeah. And also like the writing of that scene was so odd, because it was like all of a sudden like we're supposed to think like, oh, Gaston, like we don't like you, you're not one of the good ones. And I'm like, I mean, it's kind of implied that maybe he didn't love and listen to his wife as much as like we were told at the beginning, which like, yeah, that would be shitty. But I'm like, otherwise the only thing he's really done has been like, okay, you want a divorce, like
send me my
why
bike.
send me my bike. Like why are we supposed to be so anti-Gaston at this point? Like,
yeah. And you know what, I don't care if he's a jerk who doesn't listen to his wife. He's not related to her, so he's a catch.
It's like, oh, you have different DNA than I do, let's get married immediately. Like, that's a rare find here.
So moving on to other questions. What did you guys think about the setting of Macondo?
Do you want to go, Julia? I might have gone first last time.
I don't have strong feelings on Macondo.
Yeah.
It definitely, like, I did read it as a very like isolated, secluded place, which I think is the effect he was going for. I thought, just based on like what I knew about this book before actually reading it, I thought it was going to be more of like this sort of like mystical, magical place instead of just like a town. But it was cool how there were some things that kind of came full circle, where he was like, it's going to be made of ice. And then they like had the ice factory. I was like, oh. But yeah, I don't think I would want to live there. That's not the question, but I would not want to live there.
Yeah. I also didn't have strong feelings about it as a setting. Like, I do think that the way he very intentionally maps like the rise and fall of the city with the rise and fall of the family who founded it. Like, I think that's interesting. And he obviously does that very effectively. Like, I think, you know, we see like the like crumbling infrastructure as like the family's also falling apart. So like, I think that's interesting, but I feel like all of the plot stuff was understandably very centered on this like isolated community. I did not care about any of the plot lines, like at all. I didn't care about the military stuff. I didn't like the banana stuff, although I will say that like massacre and the way that like everybody is just made to forget, like that's horrifying. And I think that was very effective. And I think that's probably, I was going to say that has to be one of the specific elements that he like took from Colombian history. And the way that like, oh no, they proved in court that the workers never existed. Like wild, horrifying, very effective.
So dystopian and creepy, actually.
Exactly. So that part,
like happens too, like in wartime.
Yeah,
a lot of soldiers will destroy records of people.
Yeah, and so that's one of the parts that like I was talking about at the beginning that I do think this book did well, is like some of the stuff about like the government and like war and conflict and violence. That was that scene, and the fact that like even generations after like the Buendias are like, oh, that crazy family who thinks that like a bunch of people died, and it's horrible because as the readers we know they did. So yeah, like stuff like that I think was interesting, but like the actual plot lines, not my favorite. I think because the community is so isolated, a lot of the story felt incredibly repetitive, which I know is the point, that it's about like cycles and repetition, but also like there's only so many times where I can read the same kind of disaster like over and over. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if that's like a definitive answer to your question. I also think it's hilarious, but also kind of like messed up that throughout the whole book, Ursula is like, be careful not to marry someone too close. Pigtails running our family. Like, what? And like, nobody is that fussed about it. Like, kids just show up. And you'd think that if this were a thing you knew your family had a history of, that you'd be like, before I marry this person, I should find out just a little bit more about like who their parents are, where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't help. Ursula tried. Didn't help.
Yeah. Well, and like when in doubt, if like your cousin or sibling or aunt is raising that child, they are probably related to you. I promise you, they are a child out of wedlock who just showed up at the door one day. So just don't even look at them. Don't give them a second glance.
Off limits. Basically, if they're living in this house, don't fuck them.
Please, I'm begging you. The setting of Macondo, I think, is interesting in that it is so cut off and so anachronistic. You don't really have a sense of time or place. You know, it's in Latin America, probably Colombia, but you don't know where, you don't know when. You get ideas of like inventions that are happening, like the movies and stuff, but you don't necessarily like have an understanding of like, is this 1930? Is it 50s? Is it even before that? Which I think is interesting, and also sort of contributes to this solitude, and that maybe they're not progressing the same way the world is.
Yeah.
But you are, and I do think it's interesting that you don't get to know a lot of the other people in the city because the Buendia family stays so isolated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I agree, Taylor. I think that probably the most interesting thing about it is the sort of like nebulous nature of time, in that like in the beginning of the book, it was talking, there's like this line that's, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, before there were names for things. And it's like, okay, that sounds like cavemen. Like, what are you talking about?
Prehistory.
Yeah. It's like, what? And then it's like, oh, but now we have, you know, all these things. And so I'm like, wait. So yeah, that's all very just sort of like nebulous, I think, in a very intentional way, or what I assume is an intentional way, even though I don't understand what the intention is. I think there is intention there. And then also in, like, you just kind of see it woven. It was another thing I was trying to tab, actually, is just like time, because you get, it's the Colonel, Aureliano, who like when he comes back, he keeps commenting on like how time passes, and like I don't know, it's just that was interesting.
Yeah. Can you remind me, is the Colonel Aureliano the original Aureliano who became a colonel?
Yeah, the first son. Or technically the second son, but he's the first Aureliano.
The one who kind of like accidentally became a liberal, which I thought was like very funny actually and really well done. And also like again, very interesting commentary. Like his father-in-law, I hate even saying father-in-law, but when he's like rigging the ballot boxes and Aureliano's like, I don't even care about politics, but like kind of sketchy. And he's like, well, no, I have to do this to prove that the elections are rigged. And he's like, but you're rigging the election. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting. But, and I know that this is not the question, Taylor, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I hate that we get these moments from Aureliano and we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, what a good guy. I'm like, I like, you know it's bad like when you like the opening line of the book is like apparently very famous and it is very intriguing. It's like, oh, he thinks about these things as he's facing the firing squad. Like by the time we're getting to this part of the book, I'm like, where's the firing squad? Don't threaten me with a good time.
Yeah.
Shoot this child predator right now. Like
and
the fact that he didn't.
Yeah.
What's that, Taylor?
I was like, firing squad sounds a little fast. Can we like make it a bit more slow and make it out?
Like I just really resent that. I feel like for most of the book, the author is like, yeah, but he's like basically a good guy. And I'm like, deal breaker. No.
When he was a child, I was like, is this the first male character in this book who I can root for? No.
I was all prepped to like him, and whenever I was like,
me too.
The firing squad, I was getting ready to be like broken up. And then he like was like, oh, I'm going to marry this child because I am too nervous around grown women.
And she has multiple older sisters who I could easily marry. But I want that one.
The specificity of how horny he is for the child specifically is atrocious. And they're like, okay, but she hasn't hit puberty yet, so we have to wait. Like they had to train her out of wetting the bed before she could get married. Like that's how young she still was.
And she put her dolls up in her
dolls. I'm so and after she dies horribly, predictably, because children cannot safely have children, and the whole family's reaction is basically like, oh man, what a bummer. She was so nice. Like none of it. There was never any suggestion of like, maybe this is one reason why you should not marry prepubescent children.
Yeah. They're literally like, we'll miss her childlike wonder. And it's like, no, that's wonder.
Yeah. It's wonder child. Not child.
Literal baby.
Yeah, that one, like, I felt so bad for Remedios. Remedios or Remedias? Remedios. I felt like really bad for her. And like people were making jokes about it. Like I think Pilar was like, oh, you're gonna have to raise your own wife. And I'm like, at first I was like, oh, sick burn, Pilar. But then she sort of laughs it off and she's like, we have fun.
So this line is one of the ones I tabbed where I was like, just don't. The image of Remedios, the magistrate's younger daughter, who, because of her age, could have been his daughter, kept paining him in some part of his body. It was a physical sensation that almost bothered him when he walked like a pebble in his shoe. Hey, don't.
No.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah. Don't talk about how horny you are about someone who could be your daughter. Just don't.
Yeah, it boggles the mind how no one in her family or Aureliano's family was like, no. You can't.
And especially because... What's that, Julia?
I said we should have shut it down a lot harder.
Yes. Yeah. And like at first I thought her parents were, because they were like clearly put off, and they were like, we have older daughters who are actual adults, and he's like, I want that one. And then it seemed like pretty much immediately they're like, okay, sure, like that's fine, but let's wait till she gets her period so that you can, I don't know, like get her pregnant immediately. Like literally, why? Like if they don't care about marrying her off when she's still a child, it's just important that she's like a post-puberty child. Like why would they specify that unless they're like, well, you obviously are gonna like fuck her immediately, so
I genuinely think that's 100%.
it is. I hate it so much. Anytime the book was like, and then Aureliano did a good thing, and I'm like, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
Irredeemable.
Gross, stinky boy.
Throw the whole man away.
Throw him away. Also, like what you were saying about Taylor about like the Pilar, like, oh, this is so funny. You're like raising your wife, and it's like she didn't actually have an issue with it. She's like, isn't life strange? Like the other thing that was like that is like near the end, I forget who it was. It might have been the like servant in their house, who at this point I had forgotten she was related to the family because I could not keep any of these people straight in my head. Yeah, so like I think it might have been when she was finally like really old and like leaving the family or whatever. And I don't even remember which incestuous relationship it is that she finds out about. And her reaction is like, runs in the family. Like, yeah, like, oh, those Buendias, like they're funny. And I'm like, ma'am, what? Like it's not like she misunderstands. Like she knows. She's like, oh, well, that tracks.
Yeah, that again.
Like, yeah.
I also love like runs in the family. Like, yeah,
It
a lot of
does,
runs in this family.
You know what? Honestly, I think we would have been better served not by a family tree, but like a Shakespearean like cast of characters.
Yeah.
That way they could be like Aureliano, son of so and so, husband of so and so, sibling to XYZ. Like, I feel like that would have been
those are all the same person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been way more helpful. And there's that part where like the narration of the book is like, and then this character like runs off to like visit his cousin who is also his aunt, and I'm like, why are you trying to make this funny? Like I'm laughing because I'm horrified and disgusted. Like I'm not laughing with you, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Like
I'm laughing so I don't cry.
Yeah, I'm laughing like the meme that I sent in our group chat of just like Dreyfus being, what the fuck? Like, yeah, that kind of laughing.
So we've talked a lot about members of the Buendia family. So I have a list, but are there any in particular that you guys want to talk about? Because there's a lot of characters, and a lot of them bleed into each other. And
I mean, I hate pretty much all of them, like for very similar reasons. Like Ursula kept me going,
and even she was a perv.
I know.
And honestly,
yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, and there's things that she does where I'm like, that's not like what I would love to see a mother doing. Like, I don't want you to be like flogging your child or whatever. But when your children are like a dictator, or is that like her grandson? I don't even know.
Yeah.
When it's like a dictator and like a sexual predator, a pedophile, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, beat him. Just go ahead. It's fine.
Do it.
What was I gotta find? There's the one that was so iconic.
Yes. Is it the one where she like shows up at his office and she's like, I know I can't make you spare him, but I just want you to know that after you kill him, someday I will kill you with my own two hands. And I'm like, boss ass bitch, I love you. Also, like, why did everybody hate what was his name? Gilberto? Was that it? Like the guy who almost got executed? I'm like, he seems nice. He's like one of the only decent people in this story. And Emerance is like, disgusting. Get away from me. You're not my cousin. Ew. Like,
you can stick around, but I'm not gonna marry you. So
sorry. I'm spoken for by my child nephew that I raised and bathe.
The one where Ursula's like, I know that you're gonna shoot and hit an elbow. She said calmly. and I can't do anything to stop it. But I give you one warning. As soon as I see his body, I swear to you by the bones of my father and mother, by the memory of Jose Arcadio Buendia, I swear to you before God that I will drag you out from wherever you're hiding and kill you with my own 2 hands. Before leaving the room, without waiting for any reply, she concluded, it's the same as if you'd been born with the tail of a pig. I love her.
I love her. Ugh. So good. It's very much. What's that, Julia?
I said the shame is equally as strong.
Yeah. It's very similar energy to me as the I would eat his heart in the marketplace, except Ursula's like, I'm going to. Like, it's happening. Like,
it's
I know I can't convince
it's a promise.
Exactly. She's like, I know I can't convince you, so I'm just letting you know how things are gonna go. Like, a queen. Yeah. I also loved all the parts where she would like basically round up the wives in the town, and they're like, this bullshit has to stop, and they just like when she's, I think it's around a similar part as the quote you read, Julia, where she's like, you know, we may be women and we're not supposed to be in politics, but we can always spank our children when they need it. And I'm like, I am very against corporal punishment for children. But as you were saying, Julia, when you're a like sexual predator or a dictator, like a murderer, have at it. Go.
Like, I would equally applaud like Hitler's mother being like, no, spank, spank. Like, I'd be rooting her on too. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Ursula was the only one that, and Remedios, but she was barely in the book.
Yeah.
She's more of an idea than a character.
Really. Yeah. And I like, it's weird because like Remedios the beauty, who, it's weird because like she also was like creeped on by literally everybody, but because she didn't care, it felt less gross. Like, I don't know. It's weird. It's like you had to take what you could get with this book, because I'm like, this is horribly violating that this man is like spying on you naked, but also she has no embarrassment about it. So not that what he does isn't wrong, but it's not as like disgusting to read because she's not being like humiliated and controlled and everything. She's just like, oh, be careful. The roof's going to fall in. And then it does. And he dies. And I'm like, not crying.
Oops. Oh no.
Oh no. Yeah.
But if there aren't any other characters we want to talk about, we can move on. I will say, I'm sure it's symbolic, but tying your husband to a chestnut tree because his mind is going is a little bit of an interesting solution.
That was
it was part of the biblical symbolism, apparently. I don't know. Spark Notes says, take it with a grain of salt, that it's like, you know, the tree of knowledge. And because he wanted so much to like invent and discover and blah, 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 that when he went insane, that was like him being like, okay, well, you ate the fruit and now you're paying for it. I don't know. Make it that way you will.
I mean, that makes more sense. I don't know. Like I said, my brain got fried, so I'm like, maybe this literally happened. Maybe they just.
I think it did.
They did. They straight up timed him.
Yeah. I mean, like
for years,
for no reason.
Yeah. Like, it's weird because there were some parts where, and I know that this is like very much part of the like magical realism genre, so I'm not saying like this thing in itself is a problem, but like I feel like kind of like we discussed for like Water for Chocolate, there were some moments where those scenes and that imagery like so worked. Like, it was so good. Like, one of my favorite scenes, possibly my favorite scene in the entire book, is when Amaranta is talking to, like, she has that vision of Death, who's like sitting next to her and doing needlework. And it is so interesting and so well written. And like Death is like giving her instructions about like, you're going to weave your own shroud and you will like, you won't die until you finish it, but you also, and it's just like such an interesting image, and all of that was fascinating. And then like as Amaranta's like preparing her own funeral, like the townspeople are kind of like, this is a little like weird even for you, like this is kind of kooky, but then like they're all giving her messages to take to like their dead loved ones, and it's just like such a good and interesting scene. So that was like great. But then there were other moments where I'm like, this just like, why are we doing this? Like one of the things, I think we talked about this before we went live, but it's like Rebecca and all of the like really gross stuff about her eating like dirt and worms and blah blah. At one point she like throws up and there are leeches in it. And I'm like, disgusting. And also, what? Like, none of that makes sense. Like, I just have questions. I don't know. Like, I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, some of the parts with, like, I think the tree thing made me think of it. It's like some of those parts I think worked great. And then some I'm like, huh? Like, what?
Yeah. Or, like, I follow it and then it takes a turn and I'm like, I've lost the whole metaphor. Like with Rebecca eating the dirt, part of me was wondering if this was sort of like a reaction to like colonialism or these new governmental forces like moving in, like this idea to keep the land with you or keep Macondo with you. So she's eating it. But then she throws up the leeches and starts eating at the wall, which I also assume is like keeping the home or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like she throws up the leeches and I'm like, I'm lost. I think I was wrong about that metaphor.
Or like when Rebecca, she shows up as a little girl and she has the bones of her parents with her. Mm-hmm. And that is like, again, creepy, but it's like effective, like that image. And then like how like they just kind of gradually lose track of like where the bones are, and so then they get that prediction that they need to bury her parents, and like so all like that was good, like that was like bizarre and like effective.
And for me, that part was so wild because I think we had just been in the dynamic for so long that I forgot she was adopted to the family.
Yes.
And so when they were like, you're not going to find happiness until your parents are buried, I was like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh no, her parents, her bones.
Like, I was like, they're going to kill Ursula? Like, I can't handle that.
Yeah. I also like the idea of them losing track of the bones.
They're like, where did you put the corpse? Like, it's like I didn't have it last.
Like, oh, they were bothering me, so I put them in the wall. Like, so weird.
Yeah.
So wild.
It's just weird.
Let's see. So why do we think the Buendia family was wiped from existence? Like, what's the significance of them being sort of wiped from the face of the earth, other than like they had to be stopped?
Other than throw the whole family away.
God's just like, you know what? I might have made a mistake with this.
God, I take this one back.
Let me just get a lightning bolt real quick. We gotta undo this one.
Truly. Like actually it's funny that you say it that way, because I actually remember at the very end of the book, and it's like I hadn't realized that the like horrifying monster baby who gets carried off and eaten by fire ants that was like the last of the line, and that, you know, now like Aureliano, one of the Aurelianos, like he's like the last of the line as well. So like the family has at this point effectively died out. And like there was a split second, like I read that, I'm like, oh, like, oh good, like they can't do any more harm. But other than that, I do feel like it's, again, there's like a lot of like cyclical kind of theme discussion, and I sort of feel like they've run out of chances, you know, like they keep getting these opportunities with new generations to do things differently, and they all keep making the same mistakes. So I feel like, I wonder if maybe that is part of why like they get wiped out as the town is sort of like failing, is because it's like their glory days are over, you know, they had many opportunities and they squandered them.
I think that's like a really, really good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't think about it much further than they had to be stopped.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what I said earlier, where I was like, I was on SparkNotes reading the part about like, and then because his wife died, he went off with a prostitute, but forgot about the baby and came back to find it being eaten alive by fire ants. And I was like, I wanted the family to end, but not like this. This isn't not what like I asked for. Like,
yeah. It also like, it's weird. I don't know if we're meant to think that like the midwife killed the baby, or if like the baby died by itself. Like, I don't know. It was, because it was very clearly like,
baby.
You what?
I think the last Aureliano forgot, or I don't know if he's the last one, but Aureliano forgot that he had the baby. Like he was so lost in grief.
Right. Oh, so you think that like the baby starved or something? Probably that would make sense. Yeah. And again, like, so there's all of the like morally repugnant and disgusting things, and then there's just like regular disgusting where I'm like, why are you describing, like, why are you giving me so much information about like this rotting corpse? Like, please stop. And like, Julia, you probably have thoughts on this too. Like, so we both read a lot of historical fiction, and Taylor, I know you read some as well. I feel like this is a big problem with historical fiction authors, where it's like they have to prove that they did their research and that they make their book gritty enough. So they're like, everybody had 4 kinds of syphilis. Let me tell you about all of their disgusting oozing sores, and nobody bathes, and here's all the bugs that are living in their body, and like all this stuff. Like, so much detail. And I'm like, I get it. You are a serious adult writer. You write serious adult books. Please stop describing the leeches. Like,
It's gross.
I feel like, I feel like this book really fell into that a lot, even though I know it's not like just historical fiction, but there were just so many parts where I'm like, why? Like, literally, why do we have to have this information? I will never get this description out of my head. Like,
it's just a thoroughly unpleasant book in so many different like ways.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah. Yep. And I also like going back to Pietro and how I think he was done so dirty. Mm-hmm. That is another one of the many horrible things that happens where it's like, for the most part, like, I guess supposedly Amaranta does feel bad about it forever because she wears that bandage forever, but like, I don't know. Does she feel bad? Like, I don't know.
I'm
but
still
it's like,
confused why she rejected him, because I thought she genuinely did want him.
Yeah,
like, you were going to kill her.
And he's a catch. Like, a charming Italian man who's not related to you and who is like, oh, I'm going to take you to Rome and we're going to do all this stuff.
Toys.
I make toys and I teach music and I'm really smart. And I'm like,
and I teach children.
The best man in the book.
Yeah.
And he gets rejected
the only
twice.
Other good character, a blonde man. Come on now.
That's right. That's right.
But it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Cara, about how they have all these chances to like diversify their bloodline and stuff, and they squander it because they're like, I think my aunt might be sexier.
I love that impression of what one of the nephews would sound like. I think my aunt might be sexier.
It's all like extreme arrogance too, because I have to assume they're just like people who look like them.
Something.
There's something wrong. We're trying so hard to find a rational reason for it. Like, yeah. And it really upset me. Again, it reminded me of East of Eden. And I know I keep making comparisons, even though I'm like, I shouldn't compare it too much. But like that book also, there were multiple suicides that were so upsetting. Not that there's ever one that isn't, but like everybody, it's like thrown in there for like extra tragedy, just sprinkle it on top. And then like nobody really cares. Like the number of people who kill themselves for love, like later it's like Remedios the Beauty, which again, some of them were creeps, but it's like, it's yet another thing where I'm like, this is just unnecessary because you're clearly not doing it for a reason. It's just like, oh, let's add more tragic backstory to this family at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah. Okay. We're coming up on the end. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
I'll throw in just for context that the scene that made me originally DNF the audiobook the first time is our original marriage and how she wears her big chastity belt to bed and he shows up with a spear and rapes her. I was like, I'm done here. I'm actually done here.
And then he like blames her because he's like, a man made fun of me for not having like sex with my wife, so I killed him, and it's your fault.
Yeah.
And it's like, you didn't have to kill him.
Yep.
Like literally any action by the men in this book, you didn't have to though. Like and some of the women. Some of the women too.
So my Goodreads review is like, first DNF, 20 pages. Second DNF, 200 pages in. Trust your gut. Like,
Yeah.
because it was just more of the same, and I hated it all the way.
Yeah, no, it was quite awful. You know, it's bad when, because I'm reading The Color Purple too, and I'm like, that's a much more pleasant read. I can escape.
This is a getaway.
Let's read something light and fluffy like The Color Purple. Like,
yeah. Though I have my own things to say about Alice Walker. The woman is
complex.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else we wanted to talk about, or can we move to quotes? Which I have to admit, I didn't pull out a quote.
No,
I do have some quotes.
I have a few, but like when Julia was saying like near the beginning of our read and you were like, oh, I only have 2 tab colors and one of them is for thanks, I hate it. I'm like, I'm not even tabbing this one. I am not going to give it that level of attention and time.
I was trying to like it so hard, which I think is like the worst.
We were rooting for you.
I was like, I will find the meaning in here, because what will happen is I'll get halfway through and I'll be like, I see what the vision is. I see the purpose. So even though it's hard to read, that it, you know, like I'm sensing the themes and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, actually, this book is like the antithesis of this book club, because this is how I think other people feel when they try to read classics and they're like, I'm an idiot, I don't understand this. That's how this book made me feel, and that's why I'm so mad. Like, I shouldn't feel dumb trying to understand your book. Write it better.
Yeah.
I feel like we should get Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Nobel Prize for reading this.
Actually, it's ours now.
Yeah.
I'll take
Sorry,
it.
man. One thing I did want to say right before we get into quotes is I did think it was interesting. I don't know if you guys like had thoughts about this, but it's like we talked about the Romani people and how like overall they're much more positively characterized than a lot of books in the era would have done. But like some of the racial stuff was still very weird, and I feel like it was in ways that were not intentional. Like anytime the word mulatto was used, I was like,
Yeah.
And apparently all the sexiest prostitutes were mulattoes.
Of course.
Yes.
On one hand, I'm like, well, thanks for the compliment. But on the other
Thank you. I'm glad. But also gross, thanks.
And also that word is complicated. I understand that that's the word they used back then.
Right.
Yeah. And people used mulatto up until I think the 2000s.
Yeah. And it also wasn't. Yeah, I don't know if it was so much tied to use of the word, because like as you were saying, Taylor, that was just like of the period, that's what they would have used. But it was also like the characterization, like one of the Aurelianos, his like special prostitute, and also her name was like, I'm like, you can't tell me this isn't like Black Lady in Spanish or something, you know, like like I'm picturing Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he's being like, and then he goes to this Black lady and he's like, hey.
J.K. Rowling naming conventions.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys
beautiful Asian prostitute, Cho Chang.
Yeah.
That's the vibe.
Really, really similar. Yeah. So it was like just weird stuff like that throughout where it's like I don't know. I was reminded like, oh yeah, this book was written decades ago.
Wasn't there like also like a couple anti-Semitic lines? Because I know
the wandering Jew thing. That's another good content warning I need to add. Thank you.
That is one. Okay, again, I didn't get to that point in the book. I had to read it on Spark Notes, and it was like a one-line description, and they were like I don't even remember what it was, like the weirdest phrase. They were like a humanoid creature, the wandering Jew. I was like, what do you mean creature? I was like taken aback. I was
yeah. That moment like brought me temporarily to lucidity, because I had kind of like blanked out for a bit, and then I heard them refer to like the wandering Jew, and I was like, wait, hold up, wait a minute,
what? Yeah, and I had like I knew about that trope and this like invented story of like it's this evil Jewish monster who like just does bad things vaguely. So like I knew about it, but I don't know that I had like read a book where that was used like in earnest until this point. And I'm like, I did not need this. Like, why are we here?
Also, he doesn't get a name. Like, hey, this
He's-
is Craig. He's spending spring break in Colombia, and this is how you treat him.
Yeah. Capital W, capital J, the wandering Jew.
Well, and it was like it was like a boogeyman thing. It was like then like he's gonna eat your children if you're not careful. Like it's horrible. Because it's like every time I thought like I was like, okay, so that no new awful stuff at least, right?
Yeah.
And then the book is like, and then, okay, every time I got to another like incest part, and I'm like, this is the last one, right? And it never was.
It must be.
Surely there can't be another.
It never was.
I think that's a disappointing thing sometimes about reading like books from marginalized authors is that you forget that, especially when they're super old, like they have biases too.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, so nice to read a book by a fellow Latino, and it's like, oh, he's anti-Semitic, and apparently all mixed race people are seductresses.
Yes,
we
that
love
was another thing that. Yeah.
And like I said, on one hand, thanks for the compliment. I'd rather that than troll, but you know.
Yeah. Oh, and also like the street in the community where like all of the Black people live, and it's like, and they're just doing their like sexy music, and they're they're just partying all hours of the day or like napping. It's just very like. This isn't great. Gabriel, why?
Wanted to be like invited to the cookout so bad.
Pick me energy.
But he did put Pietro and Bruno in like the Arab corner, and they were like, "Hey, we're setting up business here. Hi guys," and everyone was cool with that. So I'm like, "Okay, that's nice."
I will say it's interesting that like the diversity of Colombia is also like portrayed. It's just and maybe like I assume like there was segregation as well there, but you know the sort of like minority group writing and prejudice reminded me of Oscar Wilde, where he was both wildly anti-Semitic and just did not like women. And it's like I don't know. I expected better from you, but
or like I love like The Yellow Wallpaper is a fantastic short story, but like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, disgustingly racist human being, like awful. Like not that any amount is acceptable, but you know some of those authors where you read about them and you're like, even by the standards of the time, I feel like there were other racists who were like, ma'am, calm down.
H.P. Lovecraft levels.
Yeah. So I get it. Yeah. Sometimes it's like, man, sometimes you're so on point and sometimes not at all. Yeah. I was going to say something else about what you were saying, Taylor. I can't remember. What part were we just talking about?
Racism of the book,
right?
Or how other races were depicted.
Yeah, and like it was like a very insular community, but like it was nice that it wasn't always like you have a different skin color, get out of here, you know, like it wasn't. It was more nuanced than that. I also think it's really interesting that like the like banana company thing, which is like arguably like one of the worst things that happens to like the town in general. It's because one white man ate a banana. Like, and I was like, that, yeah, like that tracks.
Fair
like,
enough.
The white guy shows up and just ruins everything.
Do either of you watch Drunk History? Because there's an entire a chunk of an episode that's about like the history of the banana industry. Is very much giving that.
I haven't seen that one, but I'm going to have to now.
Yeah, and fun fact, banana flavored candy that tastes nothing like bananas tastes like an extinct variety of banana that we no longer have. So it does taste like banana, but a banana we've never had.
Interesting.
Fun banana facts from Julia.
Yeah. We deserve it.
We gotta lighten the mood somehow.
That's right.
Taylor, change the name of the live show. Fun banana facts.
Skip to whatever minute we're on.
Yeah.
Did we want to share quotes before we announce our next live show and close it out?
Yes. So I have a quote. It's kind of a long one. But I okay, one scene that I actually really loved in this book is the like insomnia, whatever disease it was, that like makes them start to lose their memory. I thought that was so interesting. And I really like this passage. So apologies, it's kind of long. So he is so Jose Arcadio Buendia, like the original father, this is when he starts like labeling everything, like this is a chair, this is a bed, this is little by little, studying the infinite possibilities of a loss of memory, he realized that the day might come when things would be recognized by their inscriptions, but that no one would remember their use. Then he was more explicit. The sign that he hung on the neck of the cow was exemplary proof of the way in which the inhabitants of Macondo were prepared to fight against the loss of memory. This is the cow. She must be milked every morning so that she will produce milk, and the milk must be boiled in order to be mixed with coffee to make coffee and milk. Thus they went on, living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irredeemably. Sorry, I could not recognize that word. But which would escape irredeemably when they forgot the values of the written letters.
It's really good.
And then also after that, really quick, then he tries to build a memory machine that like plays you, like you review every morning from beginning to end, the totality of knowledge acquired during one's life. And I wrote, oh my God, this is the end of 51st Dates.
Yep.
Yeah, this quote, like, I know when we talk about these quotes, it's going to remind me that Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a very talented writer in terms of style.
It could be.
I wish he used it for good instead of evil.
That's right. Precisely.
Cara, did you want to go?
Yes, I just have a couple. One of them is one of Ursula's many iconic moments, arguably her first. When Jose Arcadio Buendia is like getting ready to just go off on another stupid expedition, because that's all the man did. Yeah. Let's see, but that time Ursula had anticipated his feverish designs. With the secret and implacable labor of a small ant, she predisposed the women of the village against the flightiness of their husbands, who were already preparing for the move. Jose Arcadio Buendia did not know at what moment or because of what adverse forces his plan had become enveloped in a web of pretexts, disappointments, and evasions until it turned into nothing but an illusion. Ursula watched him with innocent attention and even felt some pity for him on the morning when she found him in the back room, muttering about his plans for moving as he placed his laboratory pieces in their original boxes. Like, I love her. And I love that image of her being like, okay, yeah, sweetie, you're going to go into the jungle. And she like immediately goes to all the other women and she's like, we cannot let them do this. This is nonsense. We have to save them from themselves. And then they do.
Love that.
Yeah.
Did
you have one? Yeah.
I'm just going to do the final words because for me, this was the best quote. One, because he's a good writer, but two, it ended the book. Before reaching the final line, however, he had already understood that he would never leave that room, for it was foreseen that the city of mirrors or mirages would be wiped out by the wind and exiled from the memory of men at the precise moment when Aureliano Babylonia would finish deciphering the parchments, and that everything written on them was unrepeatable, since time immemorial and forevermore, because races condemned to 100 years of solitude did not have a second opportunity on Earth. And thank God they didn't have a second opportunity.
Stop giving these people chances. That also reminded me, yet another thing I hated is the entire storyline around the Babyliano guy. Like I forget what the girl's name was now. Mei. I think it was Mei. I really liked her. I was like, look at her, being like following the rules, but then also having fun and living her best life. And guess what? Everything gets ruined. Like we really can't have any marginally likable character who stays for any amount of time or is allowed to have any level of happiness. Like I didn't love the guy that much because one of the things that I really loved about Mei is that like she really she was very like confident in herself, and she was like, I'm too good for you. And so I didn't like that the guy sort of like took that away from her. But I am really just upset about everything that happened with her in that relationship. And like so many people just like died in misery, and the book is like, and yeah, then we're moving on. Like yeah.
Collective sigh.
Yes. One of the few positive things, this is related to like one of the only other quotes I saved, is I thought the discussion of the like religious factions was very interesting and clever, and also very nuanced. Like it wasn't like always one way or the other. Like I feel like in a lot of stories, the priest characters or like the nuns who end up taking in Mei, they would have been like caricatures, you know? Mm-hmm. And we see that like some of them obviously are using it for bad purposes, but like there's like variety there, which I liked. And one of the quotes that I really liked was, "No one thought that there was any love in that act because they were accustomed to the familiarity of Amarantha with the rites of death. Fernanda was scandalized that she did not understand the relationship of Catholicism with life, but only its relationship with death, as if it were not a religion, but a compendium of funeral conventions." I thought that was very cool. And I also think it's very like appropriate because like the memento mori thing gets made like such a massive deal of, but that's like not the whole point. So
yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
I like this little passage that's from, this might again be when they all have the like insomnia illness. But it is when, again, the original Jose Arcadio, he reunites with Melquiades. And it says, "He greeted him with a broad show of affection, afraid that he had known him at another time and that he did not remember him now. But the visitor was aware of his falseness. He felt himself forgotten, not with the irredeemable forgetfulness of the heart, but with a different kind of forgetfulness, which was more cruel and irrevocable, and which he knew very well because it was the forgetfulness of death." Just like that line.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's also very interesting how there were so many ghosts everywhere that like some people could see and some couldn't, and it was just like normal. And you'd be like halfway through the book and one of the characters would be like, "Oh yeah, that corner of the room where this ghost always is," and I'm like, "What?" Because like it was just like so normal. What did you say, Julia? Sorry.
I said, "Oh, always? His ghost is just always there? Cool."
Like we find out that the man that the first Jose killed, like murdered with his spear, because of a freaking cockfight, because to be idiots.
Why is that another reoccurring thing? It's like every generation has a man who's into cockfighting.
Yeah. Also, like again with the like some of the sexual stuff was like disgustingly unethical, and some of it was just like, what? Like weird. What was the obsession with like how horny all the animals were? Like whichever guy it was were his like mistress. Yeah. The only
I just remember because it bothered me that he like the twins were Segundo, and I'm like, you're not even the second Aureliano. You're like the 19th Aureliano. I don't even know how to translate that.
Even the book is like, we are tired of keeping track of all of them, so we're starting over at 2.
Like, that's not how numbers work.
No. I think the only other quote I saved, like I'm sure there were other lines I liked, but I did not want to spend a lot of time on this on taking quotes from this book. It's Ursula says, "Say goodbye to Fernanda," she begged her. "1 minute of reconciliation is worth more than a whole life of friendship."
That's good stuff.
Good.
Yeah. Hard to beat that sexy weasel quote, but you know, I tried.
How can you top it? I have one more Ursula moment that I like, which
please.
To clarify, because I could not remember. Arcadio is her grandson, who she basically raised as her son, because it's Aureliano's son by Pilar. So she was raising him. Thanks, family tree.
You did something.
Like, a horrible, evil dictator man, and she just shows up with all the moms. The mom squad activate. When Ursula burst into the courtyard of headquarters after having gone through the town shouting shame and brandishing with rage a pitch-covered whip, Arcadio himself was preparing to give the squad the command to fire. "I dare you to, bastard," Ursula shouted. Before Arcadio had time to react, she let go with the first blow of the lash. "I dare you to, murderer," she shouted, "and kill me too, son of an evil mother. That way I won't have the eyes to weep for the shame of having raised a monster." Whipping him without mercy, she chased him into the back of the courtyard. He curled up like a snail in its shell, blah, blah, blah. The boys scattered. Before leaving the headquarters, she released the prisoners from the stocks. From that time on, she was the one who ruled the town.
I love her. Yeah. And also, like, I didn't think about this at the time that I was reading the book, but like discussing all these amazing mom moments, like there's a really big, important history of moms in Latin American countries being activists, especially for like political regimes that like just disappear people.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool that we see Ursula kind of in that mold. Yeah, those truly some of the best moments in the book. I'm like, Gabriel, why can't you write like this all the time? Like,
Yeah.
just give me a story about Ursula minding her business and all of her family just leaves her alone. And we never have to hear about the Buendias again. Please,
Yeah,
God.
why even is that their last name? That just feels like too cheerful.
I know.
We're the Buendias. It's like,
Yeah.
like that should not be your family.
Yeah. It's like what's like prison in Spanish? Like, you all belong in prison. Ugh. Or trash. Bastante.
Oh my
Is that
God.
it?
The basuras.
Basuras. Thank you.
Basura family.
I'm just saying. It's
Still
a
starts with B and
suggestion.
ends with A.
What, Julia?
It still starts with B and ends with A. So you could
That's
just
right.
amend it really easily. No one would be any the wiser.
I just want to put it in the suggestion box. The trash family. Yeah. Basically, anytime Ursula yelled at one of her awful sons, I was like, another part where she does it, where I think it was possibly one of the many incest relationships where she basically like throws them out of the house and she's like, "You have dishonored me and like this family. You are not worthy to like stay here, and like you are dead to me," basically. And I'm like, wow, somebody who's like, maybe this isn't okay.
Ironically, I think that was for the least incestuous relationship. Yeah. But yeah, the point was valid.
Yeah. God, I hate that we have to qualify. It's like, okay, so this is like strong incest or like, like.
Are we talking Dollenganger incest or like Dan and Serena incest from Gossip Girl? Because those are two different kinds.
Yeah. Ugh.
But yeah, unless you guys have anything else to say about the book, we can announce what we're going to be reading for our next live show.
Yes. And also, we are still planning to do the Classies. I think we were tentatively thinking next weekend. And that'll be on my channel, and look forward to a last minute announcement the night before, as we do. But the book that we're reading next, I am also going to be the one hosting, and we're returning to Anthony Trollope. We're going to read Dr. Thorne, which is a little bit on the chunky side, but I think like with Can You Forgive Her, it's going to read pretty quickly. And I think from what I remember of the premise, it's like these two young people who are in love, and I think they like can't get married because they don't have enough money or something. And then there's like this revelation to, I think, the girl's dad, the Dr. Thorne character, that like actually she gets like this massive inheritance, but he doesn't tell them because he wants to know if they're willing to get married without it. So I think it's going to be a really interesting one. And it's technically in the Barsetshire series, but those books, you can read them as standalones as well. Like, I would like to read the second book before I get to that one, because I think it's the third one. And also so I can kind of mention any context that I think is necessary when we discuss it but I don't know if that's going to happen. I have read the first one, but
Nice.
yeah.
And I will say, even though my book won't be until March, you both now have a get out of jail free card if you absolutely loathe the book that I pick to DNF it. So
Well, hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully all of the rest of the books for 2024 will be 4 and 5 stars.
It's good to have an escape in your back pocket, though. Like,
I think all of mine are fairly short, at least. So there's that.
yeah. I mean, I will say I think I came pretty close with Save Me the Waltz. And I think what ultimately saved me from DNFing is I'm like, none of this means anything. So it doesn't really matter if I just like read this so fast I don't take any of it in. It's fine. There's nothing there.
Who wrote that again?
Zelda Fitzgerald.
Thank you. Yes,
because we were all like
to remember.
We were all like in like their personal life, Team Zelda 1000%.
Yeah,
but
that's why I could finish it. I was like, do it for Zelda.
Do it for Zelda.
But yeah, thank you so much, Cara and Julia, for joining me on this journey.
Thank you all for suffering with me and making it a fun experience.
Go ahead and follow Cara and Julia if you're not, and we will see you for the classies then.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.